2.5 hours.
Great. Good. Okay, great. So hi Linda.
Hi Andy.
Great to see you. So I'm just waiting to get everybody in the room, and I just got to do a couple of things here now. Hi to everybody. Oh, I've got to get rid of that. Hi everybody. Say hi in the chat, because I'm doing quite good on the tech now, Lindy, see, because I have like a multi-screen thing going on now, so I can see in the room, and it's all great. Just to let people know, we've had the usual kind of spammers in. Hi Kim, great to see you. We've had oh, they're all pulling now. We've had a few spammers in, so please, if you see any links anywhere, don't click them. But I think I've got rid of them. I have to do my kind of bouncer doorman on the door thing, Linda, sometimes, and do something. So Jania, hi. Lainey, hi. Kelly, hi. Robin, oh, Robin Hood, great to say hi. Robin, hi Shay. They're all coming in saying hi. Good. Hi Daniela, hi Laura, hi Zoe, hi everybody. Good. Well, great to see you all as we kind of build up to Christmas, and what a treat. What a treat. Linda and I have been talking about this for a while. And as always, these things can take a little bit of kind of getting together, but it's just so great to have you, especially as a little pre-Christmas treat, Linda.
Well, I'm just delighted to be here and to have, this opportunity to use your extraordinary platform, to carry our message of do no harm care and training to both of our audiences and beyond.
Isn't it funny, I remember we were talking about this before when we were having a chat recently, just trying to work out how we kind of connected and things. But I know in the early days when I was just starting to put together some little in-person talks, because this is like going way back when we used to do that, like, the village hall, get people around, have a chat. And I was so taken by the hierarchy of dog needs that I wanted to use it. I think that's when we kind of connected initially. And then when I was working on Phantom of the Operant, the kind of article, I worked on that for months and months and months, and you were really supportive in that process. And you were one of the people who was like, come on, Andy, we got to get this out. Do it now, get it out.
I was just stunned when you put that out. You had, touched the key in me, using, the phantom, the illusion of the operant, just nailed it, Andy. So, and thinking now that quadrants are just one piece, although they're an important piece of the behavior puzzle. As you have said, quadrants are necessary but not sufficient. So of course any serious student of behavior needs to learn about the quadrants, but that is, as Kim Brophy says, like the tip of the iceberg. Or I've been thinking about it sort of like a volcano, that what is underneath just may come gushing out. And so we need to look at that underneath factor. So yeah, I remember that I went back and looked at a little bit at our history, and I was like, wow. Yeah, we do go back a ways, and it's because of our mutual appreciation for the eclectic approach, and I think that does come in part from our academic training, because in graduate school we learn about many different types of learning, but somehow dog training got stuck on the operant side of learning theory, and that sadly is often to the detriment of our dogs, and to the frustration of a lot of us who felt that like something's missing there. A lot is missing. It's just one piece of the puzzle. So may I, if I can, I want to just share why an example of the different models of behavior and how different professionals might interpret a dog bite, which I felt was a good example that all pet parents and professionals could relate to. And of course, this is an oversimplification, but this is where just to, to illustrate where the focus may be. So for example, in the behavioral model, it theorizes that a dog bites a person because the dog has been reinforced or punished for biting. Or the dog associates the person with something that previously caused an involuntary physiological response or a learned aversive response. In the affective neuroscience model, like PANCSAP, for example, in ethology, or well, in the affective neuroscience model, excuse me, this model theorizes that a dog bites a person because the dog is experiencing fear, panic, or rage on the neurological or hormonal levels. In the ethological model, this model would theorize that a dog bites a person because it is adaptive to survival, to bite when threatened, or to compete for resources. And the medical model would say that this practice theorizes that a dog bites a person because the dog has a pathological condition or is in pain. So the biological model would theorize that a dog bites a person because of the propensity for aggression acquired through the dog's lineage. So we have all these different ways of looking at behavior. But, you know, moving as we are to behavior being an expression of need, of unmet or undermet need is, you know, the progression that I'm so, you know, happy to take part in now. But your coining of that term, the operant merry-go-round, that just nailed it for me. Because I had been involved in so many discussions on Yahoo forums, for example, for 10 years. I debated and argued with people these points of reinforcement and punishment, and how do we fit the square peg in the round hole? And it got me nowhere. I finally gave up on that merry-go-round. I got off that merry-go-round. I decided, you know, to try to find a way to create a representation of reality, and it's only a representation of reality, and all of those fall short. But yes, that is why I created the hierarchy of dog needs as an alternative way of looking at our dogs and trying to understand them.
We'll come on to the hierarchy dogs needs and mix. I think it deserves a little section on its own so we can look at that. But I think what you've just done there, Linda, is brilliant. To look at one specific thing like a bite and look at all the different lenses that will have their own opinion on it. And of course, this is the kind of thing that we're starting to think about now, which is the nuances and complexities and the richness of behavior for the individual, because it could be any of those and all of those, actually. But the one thing that a lot of individual disciplines don't do is necessarily think, but what about this dog? What is this dog trying to tell us through those connective elements? And we've got so many amazing people now in the industry who are focusing in on individual aspects and offering us an insight into those things. And then we also have people who are providing spaces, and this is what I'm trying to do in dog centered care, of course, where people can take those strands and those threads and just think, how can I be better available to that individual dog in front of me? And you used the word missing earlier, the kind of missing link. I think a lot of us have felt for a long time, something is missing here. You know, I think part of the allure of the very heavy opera model was when we were kind of very much thinking about how do we best train a dog? How do we best get compliance for a dog? Mm-hmm. Opera means are powerful. And then we had all the kind of, and rightly so, by the way, discussions and battles about how do we do that task more humanely, more kindly. And that's where we had the whole movement and discussions around methods and tools. But I think now we've got to the point where you need to think that, well, what we've got to that bit. What does this next step look like? What does moving forward look like? And I think it is having this more rounded, holistic approach, really, thinking about these different strands and being humble enough, I think, to allow those different elements to come through.
Right. You know, in my work in research in behavioral neurobiology. And you know that we always look at individual variation. It's not really defined as to what that is, but it is statistically, we know that as you said, we know what is the experience for the individual. So there is that important element of recognizing that what we are dealing with here are sentient creatures. And so I would like to just talk a little bit about that. And yes, I am totally on board with all these new ideas coming out from, from you, Kim Brophy's legs program, the slow, Laura Donaldson, Kathy Murphy, about the brain, so many different voices are being heard that that really deserve a wider platform. So, but what I did is I went from academia to the San Diego Humane Society, which was a huge leap because I had been living in this academic bubble that I loved. Actually, I had applied for PhD programs with Dr. Beckoff, by the way, but because there was so little going on in research at that time, in subjects that interested me. Most of it was around primates and birds and bees. And Dr. Beckoff told me that he didn't take any graduate students, that he was kind of a one-man show, as we were talking about our efforts ourselves. But I came out of that bubble to sort of a rude awakening of what is really going on with dogs. And so I came to the conclusion pretty quickly that we need an ethical code in the dog training industry. And so my new book quotes many do no harm ethical codes. The American Veterinary Medical Association has a first do no harm ethical code. The American Animal Hospital Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and any industry that deals with sentient creatures has a do no harm code. So, what happened with me is that I was looking for a thesis project, by the way, and working in neurobiology, and I could not find something of great interest. And my best, my advisors told me, and I had learned, if you are not passionate about your thesis subject, you will never finish. And I started getting seriously worried because, I liked what I was doing, but I wouldn't say I was passionate about it. So I asked my best friend, my BFF, I told her I was, in such a state of anxiety-stricken neurosis. I couldn't find something and I was getting frightened. And she said to me, well, Linda, what do you love? I was like, what do I love? What kind of a silly question is that? What's my thesis? And I said, I love dogs. She said, well, why don't you go down to the Humane Society and see if you can do a project with their dogs? And I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like, I'm already excited. So I went down there, and as it turns out, at that time, this was like in 2001, I'm dating myself, they weren't really using graduate students they were like, no, thank you. But we do need some volunteers. And just my one visit there, looking at these dogs, excuse me, let me know in my heart that I had found the key to how I could use my graduate training to help these dogs. So I ended up putting my master's thesis on the back burner for like as long as I could. It was close to, I don't know if, yeah, I think it was close to 4 or 5 years till I was forced to tear myself away from the Humane Society. But unlike you, I could have never worked with humans because of the trauma that I had experienced in my childhood, the neglect, the experiences of emotional abandonment and fear. And so I was drawn to work with abused children. But when I took that graduate course in developmental psychology, it like struck me to the heart. I was a very nerdy student, seeking no straight A's. I got in this class and I was seriously affected by the content, by the material that I was studying, because it was speaking to me. And so I knew I can't work with these kids. I just can't work with these kids. I won't be able to handle it. But I could work with dogs, and it's difficult. So I mean, my heart goes out to anyone who works in shelter, and I highly recommend that if you're going to get into the field, that you go out and you volunteer in a shelter. So, but that is, why I feel like I'm so passionate about animal abuse masquerading as dog training, because I identify with the unmet needs in my own childhood, and I could see something in the eyes of these dogs that created a spiritual connection through our shared trauma. And it's because you have shared some of your personal connectivity with the subject matter that I've decided, to share some as well.
I really appreciate the fact that you've shared that in this space with us, Linda. And I think, when we do make ourselves a little bit vulnerable and we do share some of our own stories, excuse me, what we find actually is that many people relate because everybody's story is different, and we all have different experiences. But I think a lot of people who kind of have an instant connection to why these discussions are so important are either people who have experience. Kim Brophy, of course, in her TED talk, talks very powerfully of her own experience of being kind of succumbing to the power of another and what that felt like. I've got my own experiences and you've just shared yours. And I think we see it. We see the potential damage, definitely, of aversive control and coercion. But we also see the real need for any living thing, especially a sentient being like a dog, to want to feel safe to communicate, and most importantly, to feel heard.
Right. Yes. Yeah. If I may, I would like to read the dedication from my book, because it really encapsulates my gratitude for force-free professionals, especially trainers, because this is a really tough field. And so it is, my book is dedicated to the passion and unfailing devotion of force-free trainers, pet professionals, and pet parents who work so hard to meet the challenge of the day to make this a better world for the dog. And I wanted to write this little poem, so I worked on it and I did. So I wrote, "We tried to look away, but we couldn't. We saw the frightened, emotionally abandoned dogs who had been shocked, choked, pronged, and beaten down, some by cruelty and some with domination in the name of training. And in their eyes, we saw bewilderment, fear, and unspeakable sadness. We felt a deep sense of helplessness and cried out to the universe, God, why don't you do something? And God responded, reminding us, I did do something. I sent you, and I sent you, and I sent you. So one of my, if I may, one of my most heart-wrenching times of day, and my work at the shelter really laid the foundation for everything I've done after that. But I used to close the shelter once in a while, which meant I was there alone with all of the dogs at night. And the shelter was, the kennels were laid out like this. And sometimes I would sing to them before I left, just any kind of silly song. And then I give them a little pep talk, you know, like, good job today. Let's rest up. And tomorrow we're really going to work on finding that forever home that's waiting for you. You know, so now I know. I was kind of lost in the academic world, really, about what is going to drive me for the rest of my life. And I finally found what I want to do, and something that will inspire me. In fact, this field is so fascinating, Andy. I mean, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn. So I had that light bulb moment about using my academic training to help the dogs, but on the other hand, you know, the dogs have been my best teachers. I started pet sitting with training for the managers of the Humane Society. And, you know, I had the academic training, and there was a wonderful program there called Trainers in Training that was based upon the San Francisco model, the Dunbar, Donaldson, Miller models, that I was able to learn how to apply my graduate work to working with dogs. So that was critical. But my experience as pet sitting with training led me to I've lived with about 60 different dogs in 60 different family home situations, 60 different problems, and 60 different, you know, challenges to, okay, this is what this really feels like with the pet parent. And so I got the opportunity to create that relationship, that bond, first and foremost, with that animal, and to look at, like, why is the behavior happening? And that question that we're asking now, not about what to do about it, how to change it, but why, first and foremost, understanding why it's happening. So I also had a very feisty grandmother, and her genes gave me the strength that I've needed to get through this, and a lot of tenacity and perseverance, overcoming challenges, because there's so much trauma in our field.
There is, and I think just listening to your story, you know, I think it's really great that people can hear this from you direct, Linda. I think because, you know, we know each other a little bit, but you know, you've shared a lot already that I didn't know myself, and I think your passion and your fire in your belly, if you like, just oozes out of everything you do, whether it's the Do No Harm group on Facebook, whether it's you know, how you really kind of, you're one of the big warriors really regarding tackling the atrocities that get done in the name of training with things like shock collars and prong collars and that kind of thing. And you have amazing people that support you. I know, like Roman and others in the group who really kind of help to keep pushing that. And I think it's interesting that that we're in a situation where there still seems to be wriggle room for some of these trainers to somehow say that they can deliver this stuff on the table. And I do wonder whether part of the narrative on our side of the fence doesn't help sometimes, actually, Linda. I think especially some of the powers that be, who still think that it's somehow we need to have it open so that we can straddle some kind of fence to to bring more people over when they're ready. I think the time has come to really try and draw a line in the sand on this now, especially for something as barbaric and as cruel as a shot collar.
I thank you for saying that, because well, I hope she doesn't mind, but Victoria Stillwell wrote an article about the difference between positive reinforcement with dogs and children and positive reinforcement with people who should know better. And she nailed it. I thought, okay, that's, this was many years ago that she published that article, but yeah, I have decided, like I said, that I had spent enough time. That's not where I'm going to put my focus any longer. And no, I'm sorry. I don't think they have anything to teach me. I see it a lot in my group. Maybe it's not in the face so much of some others in the academic world, but I have been living outside of that bubble now, and every single day, I face people coming to me. They can't find a force-free trainer in their community. There's nobody to help them. They're like, oh, I'm so glad I found your group. I've hired 2 trainers, and they both told me, well, the first one, told me I had to do this and this, which I was not comfortable with. And then the next one just couldn't help me at all. And I don't think they're force-free, and I can't find anybody. And so, some of the harrowing stories that I hear are, the same pain and suffering that I saw that resulted in a lot of dogs being abandoned at the Humane Society. So, but I'm absolutely on board with searching for more progressive and more enlightened, empathic ways of becoming, real, true carers of our pets. But if I may say, that the failure to acknowledge the suffering of dogs, on the other side of this coin, is not okay. It's just not okay. It's not a pretty subject. It's not it's not a joyful subject, and it's not a lofty sort of discussion, but it needs to be put out there. Now, I don't have statistics about most of these things, but most training businesses, most rescues, most popular books, and the most popular TV shows about dogs are part of a community where force-free trainers are not even part of the dogscape. They're just not, it's not there. Okay, if I just may, so I just want to say that there's an elephant in the room here. And I applaud you for pointing to it, because I think that we need to really rail against this, and to ignore that while talking about our more progressive goals is somehow akin to, I don't know, some kind of species privilege, or I don't know, where we give ourselves a pass to take the high road, but the dogs actually get an animal abuse and dog training gets left behind. So I think we can do both. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. That we have to do both. We have to take that higher, loftier role, and yet we have to acknowledge what's actually going on the ground here.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful point. And I think on the one side, it seems quite a big mission, because the general zeitgeist is still, because the general public are so into kind of this notion of compliance and obedience, and but I think the thing I feel is one of the big positives about this shift in focus is that there is no room for any discussion regarding deliberate aversive training within a care model. There just isn't, because if you're truly understanding, I think the good thing is all the kind of focus on a lot of the science that's coming out now, a lot of the education that's coming along, looking at the importance of physicality, the importance of emotionality, the effects of trauma, looking at all these different things. We're realizing a fuller picture now. The other thing is, I think the general public do, despite all that conditioning put on them by these TV shows and this kind of big push to having to train all the time, they do care about their dogs, Linda, and actually they're waiting. We talk about the dogs are waiting. I think the caregivers are waiting. So we have to champion stuff. I think the days of trying to square some circles about different types of the methodologies and tools, we're moving away from that now. And I think a lot of people who feel they know about behavior, in my opinion, don't. They know how to change behavior, for sure. They know how to do that pretty well, but they don't understand behavior from an intrinsic point of view, as a behavior as expression of need, as behavior as an expression of self. This is really important, thank you, Roman. Right, gonna have a look at that. Roman's just pointed out something in the events thing. I'm just gonna have a quick look at that. If you want to just take up that point, Linda, so I can just get rid of more people.
Well, yes,
things.
This turn toward a care model is exactly, what we need. And that reminds me of my study of Seligman and learned helplessness. But Seligman also is the father of positive psychology. So I became more interested in what makes successful human beings thrive, because our field is always focused on disease and dysfunction, right? So, but the important thing for me was that the takeaway from Seligman that shook the academic world and radical behaviorism was that mental events are causal. So we know that it's not only consequences or antecedent arrangements that are causal. And so just a breath away from that is the realization that internal emotional events are causal. So, fear that is either innate or learned drives behavior. And I would like to share with you that kind of ties this together, both the shock-free coalition campaign thinking, and PPG does it very well. PPG, in my opinion, is a really powerful voice that takes up both the academic end as well as understanding that we have an elephant in the room here, and deals with that as well in different programs. But Joseph Liddell, a renowned neuroscience scientist, just put it very, very nicely, explaining one trial learning and why pet parents, and why we can't afford to ignore this, because shock training, for example, is not something that you can just try, and then if it doesn't work or you don't like it, decide, well, that's not for me. That's not what is happening. So Liddell has said, and he explains it in terms of research, because we're looking for empirical evidence. And he says, we'll start with the simple behavior that we use when we study all of this, and it is Pavlovian fear conditioning. So a rat is placed in a small chamber, and the rat hears a sound. And if nothing happens, the rat begins to ignore the sound. But if the sound is paired with electric shock, and you only have to do this one time, says Liddell, then the rat develops a fear of the sound because it predicts the electric shock. And this becomes a lifelong fear. As long as you present the sound to the rat again, as long as the rat lives, the rat will be afraid of that sound, unless you've done things during the rat's lifetime to weaken that stimulus. But even if you weaken it, through, for example, extinction process, the fear always comes back.
Yeah. And I think this is what we have to recognize all the time when we work with these poor animals who've already experienced so much of this treatment. When we see them, you know, there are other strands for us to kind of have to unpick. And I think what's also really heartbreaking for me is when we think about behavior as communication of need, especially the two most important things regarding the need to feel safe and the need for relief and the need to be able to have a safe social connection, social safety. We're pre-wired for that safe social connection. When these wonderful animals have been trying to communicate need and then experience more trauma on top of that, and then they don't feel safe to connect, they seek safe connection with their caregiver, who often don't know about a lot of this stuff. They're just doing what they've been told to do. It's heartbreaking, Linda. It's heartbreaking. And these are the conversations we need to have. I think we made the mistake, well, not a mistake, but I think we need to move away from just fighting these conversations purely on methods and tools. We have to start moving this whole narrative forwards. So there is no oxygen left in the room to even say, well, look, you know, maybe we'll try the shock collar, because how can that ever provide relief for a dog? How can that ever help them to feel more safe? How can that ever help them to feel heard? And we know intrinsically, you and I, from our human psychology background, when supporting vulnerable people, those are the most important things that we have to turn up for. You know?
Right.
And interestingly, for anybody listening, it's worth mentioning that you and I also know from our human psychology educations that the human psychology field has been just as disparate and falling out and kind of championing model over this model and that kind of thing. And guess what? We'll never get a model that will fit everything because of the uniqueness and richness and complexities of the individual. So actually, rather than trying to think, how do I best change Linda's behavior, or a person's behavior or a dog's behavior, we need to start learning about how do I best become available to understand the needs of Linda. That's where we've got to focus in on. And as I say, we've got to remove the oxygen out of the room for these discussions, because if we just keep trying to tackle it based on task, then the aversive minded people will always say they can do task better, but they can't do care better. They can't do the relational element better. I spoke to somebody recently who is somebody who's an aversive trainer. I met them at a kind of a thing that I was involved with. We were just talking away, and I asked the person, it's really interesting, and I said, do you understand about trauma? And they said, yeah, I understand about trauma. I said, okay. And do you understand the possible physical conditions that animals might have that might create defensiveness in those animals, or you know, the kind of the behavioral output? And they said, oh yeah. And I said, so if you understand those, why do you still use aversives then? And they couldn't really answer that. And this is the thing, how I just find it very odd, actually, that element of that amount of dissonance, really, about knowing, oh yeah, well, I'm sure this dog might have experienced trauma, I'm sure this dog might be in pain, but I'm just still going to make him do something anyway.
Well, that's why I have become a firm believer in that this industry is not going to take care of itself. We are going to need regulation. We are going to need the strengthening of our animal welfare laws and penalties for animal abuse. That's, you know, in the guise of dog training. And, you know, if I may, one of my main motivators in creating the hierarchy of dog needs and, you know, safety is right here. It's very important. And I discuss this in length, and emotional security in the book. And yeah, that is such a basic need. That is probably more so than almost anything else. We seek safety, and humans seek safety. That's why we live in little boxes and lock the doors. That's, you know, that's why we are careful even when we, walk into a room in a party, you usually like maybe kind of hang back for a little while to see what's going on. Is it safe? Is it emotionally safe? Like, what are those people talking about? Do they look friendly? Maybe I could go speak to them, but I'm not going over there. Safety is something that, our dogs are completely dependent upon us to navigate for them. They are, Brophy talks about, dogs in captivity, and that puts a great weight of responsibility upon our shoulders to ensure that our dogs feel physically safe and emotionally safe. And these signals are so often missed. And, I've learned along the way myself, along with it, with everyone else. So I've evolved. But when I developed the hierarchy of dog needs, one of the motivations for me to create this model was my discomfort with the Lima model. And in Beyond the Operant, you mentioned the quote, creep to more punitive methods. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's what it is. And that is embedded in the Lima philosophy of training. So sadly, the Lima model has been adopted by the self-named balance trainers. And at times it's held up as a license to do harm. That is to use shock on pet dogs.
Yeah.
Even little puppies. And on the hierarchy of dog needs, the first thing that I said here is that there is never a justification to use pain, fear, dominance devices, or training methods with our dogs. And so, I have these 5 needs, and I gotta tell you, Andy, I tried so many different, I was determined. I was like, Lima, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to work for me. And I don't, I want to see if I felt a responsibility, because I had this fire within me, as you so kindly named it. I felt like I have to do something. I have to try. I have to try to do something here. So I tried so many different designs, Venn diagrams and ladders and mind maps. I mean, it's just like, how do I incorporate all of these ideas into one page? I wanted to make it accessible and free and easy to understand, but yet useful to everyone from veterinary behaviorists to force-free groomers on any pet related professional. So I landed on the adaptation of Maslow's hierarchy of dog needs, which was called the third way in psychology after Freudian analysis and radical behaviorism by Skinner. Because I thought, in the end, I thought, okay, this will be recognizable to people who have studied psychology, because I wanted to appeal to academics as well as understandable to the average person, because I believe that throwing a wide net is critical. We need to reach everyone that we can. So I have tried to throw a wide net with the hierarchy of dog needs, and also with my new book that features the hierarchy of dog needs, where the first 100 pages are devoted to exploring each item in the guide. And Beckhoff, I believe, coined this phrase, but I have a section in my book in quotes. It's called "Move Over Skinner," and because we now have data that moves us away from this reductionist behavioral explanation of behavior to a more, as you mentioned, holistic approach.
And that's it, the reductionist qualities of that. And I think this is the thing, go back to Lima, actually what we're discussing, really, our outlook is the true form of Lima, because if it's truly least intrusive, minimally aversive, that is exactly what we're doing, which is, you know, looking at the way that we can support another without making it worse, without putting in on extra pressure or extra coercion. And the notion of Lima has been completely, as you say, corrupted, because it comes down to that person's perception of, if they're still looking at doing task, if that's their only outlook, I'm going to get this dog to stop barking, I'm going to get this dog to stop pulling, I'm going to get this dog to do something, and I'm going to try and tick some boxes along the way, but I still can't do it. That now gives me permission to do more. So you're right. I think it's been, we need to do better. And I think that what I love about the hierarchy of dog needs is that it is a simple graphical representation. 3 of the vet practices that I work closely with, it's up on their wall because I introduced them to it. And people can sit in the surgery and they can just see it on the wall, right? I remember I got some banners done when I did an event years ago, back in my early days, and I put it on there, and it's a conversation starter to caregivers when they come to my little stall and they're like, what's that there? But it kind of makes sense because we can all appreciate it. What I love about your approach with the hierarchy of dog needs as well is just how gifting you are of it and how open you are, because it's had many different tweaks along the way, because people you've sometimes people have something that think like, this is it, and I'm going to be really protective over it, and nobody else can change it, and I'm not going to change it, that's it. And in fact, you weren't that. You were like, oh, that's interesting, let's tweak this, then let's tweak that. And you encourage that input from other professionals to try and see about what it would look like. And then of course you've gifted it to everybody else to use, and for free, Linda, which is amazing. You like to have people to ask you, and there's the opportunity to give a donation on the site, which I've done and which people should do. But I think it's a really wonderful visual construct, and that brings us on to the book, because I've got the book here. Here it is, guys. Very heavily thumbed, and I hate to say, Linda, I don't know your view on this. Do you know what? I was on the train recently, and I was doing some research for a talk I'm doing next year, and I was scribbling in the margins of this book, not this book, but the book. And a lady, I didn't know who she was the other side of the aisle, she said, you really shouldn't write in books, you know. And I'm like, oh. But I love writing in books because it makes it very me, and it's mine, and I like to do things. So yeah, so it has had a few scribbles, and I have to say, but what I loved about the book when I got it is, we're having these discussions today, and a lot of the people listening in, some of the professionals, some of them are caregivers. A lot of the caregivers in dog center care are pretty up on stuff anyway, right? But the general public, we have to invite them to have this shift in perception. We have to be gentle with them a little bit, because obviously if this was a book just on what the more looks like, it would just be read by the trainers, which in itself is a good thing. But the general public, how could they access it? What I love about the book is you've combined a language and an outlook that the general public, anybody picking that up, will see it and not feel it's inaccessible. But you've interwoven what this more might look like.
That was, yes, that was, you know, my goal and my challenge. Like, how do I make this palatable to the academic community and provide 18 pages of scientific citations and make it a book that pet parents who are just new on the scene could relate to and want to read. And then by virtue of having the book, they're going to get some of this other information, right? So yeah, it was a gift that I was able to, you know, I think that in finally getting through my thesis project, I felt like I could do this, but I knew that it was going to be a huge project, and it took me quite a while. I had help from some wonderful interns who did research for me. And you know, the book is doing quite well, and it is really a gift to me to read the reviews on Amazon. It is available on Dogwise, also Barnes and Noble online, and Powell's Books online, and Ingram Spark to universities and libraries, as well as bookstores. And by the way, that's my new thing now. Andy, I go out when I go traveling, I bring a bunch of books, and I go to the local animal shelters and gift them a copy. and to the local humane societies. In some of these, like most recently, I went back to Palm Springs Humane Society with my book, and I had a wonderful discussion with the director of education. And then I went to the animal shelter and had a wonderful discussion with the director of training and behavior. And, they taught me new things about what they're doing with the dogs there, allowing adult dogs to play together every day, those that are, dog friendly. And this has changed the dog's demeanor in the shelter entirely. This anticipation that we talk about a lot, the dogs are looking forward to something every day now, and they're excited and they show better. They get adopted more quickly, and they are better fits in the homes where they are adopted. So, I mean, I'm learning things and having this, opportunity to try to give it away. So reading the reviews though on Amazon has just caused me to give a big sigh of relief, because when you write a book, you never know if you're going to reach the audience that you're trying to reach. It could
Yeah.
it could very well not work at all. So I'm really glad that we're moving toward learning to not fix everything, but learning to support and to help our dogs find coping skills for self-regulation that you talk about a lot. So, because we want our dogs to experience the joy of being a dog without having to encounter all these human obstacles every step of the way. And so, and that being the core of love, which is on the hierarchy, that I got a lot of flack for including that at the time. I had a lot of pushback on it. But giants like Dr. Beckoff, who, signed on early when I showed it to him, he said, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And Dr. Simon Gabois, and they both contributed quotations for the hierarchy. And on here, it is not only about, what to do or how to do it, but it says clearly, no shock, no prong, no choke. And at the time that I put this out, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a lot of flack if I put that on there. People are gonna complain. But you know what? At the end of the day, Andy, we know in our hearts what the right thing to do is. And sometimes, we're gonna have to pay a cost for it professionally.
Yeah.
But I sleep well at night. So I have tried to keep the hierarchy of dog needs pretty standard. It has changed once, where I have just added pre-mat principle, which we could talk about and maybe another time, and social learning. But I've just been thinking again about how I might rearrange a new edition and incorporate some of the newer ideas. So yeah, I am always learning.
Well, I think the point you've made then, and definitely when you start thinking about that, let's have a chat sometime, because I've got some thoughts that I can throw at you for sure. They're only, but they're not big ones, but there's some thoughts I can throw those around. But I think
I would definitely confer with you. Absolutely.
The point you made about getting flack for stuff, it's interesting. Annie Phoenix talks about one of the things that she had the biggest kickback from was when she wrote a piece about and mentioned the word love. And it's a funny thing that people really just seem to find that very difficult. But this brings us on to a little point really, which I think is important. When we see a lot of turmoil and falling out within the community at times, that you mentioned this right at the top of the hour, actually, the job that we do, if you're a trainer or a behaviorist working, whether you're part of an organization or whether you're doing things on your own, we have a hard job. It's hard, and it's hard enough without those around us in our own community throwing stones at the same time. And I think my late father had a great saying, which was just turn up, which is just, turn up for what you believe in, and then things kind of fall in place. But it is tough sometimes. I've had my fair share of trolling and criticism, and it's what happens when you stick your head up. And I know that you've had your fair share. A mutual friend of ours, Victoria, of course, with a lot of the work she's done behind the scenes with things, she gets a lot of abuse over in the States, especially from the kind of aversive lobby. And I just think, regardless of whether we agree with somebody 100% or not, I think we just got to champion each other for turning up, because it's hard. And that doesn't mean necessarily turning up because of a big platform or to write a book. Just turning up to do our job is hard at the best of times. And I think it's good to kind of remind ourselves of that sometimes. And I just want to thank you for, oh God, what an amazing body of work, Linda. When you think about how we almost lost you to academia, what a loss that would be. I'm sure you'd have been a great asset to childhood educational psychology and development if that had been your place. But do you know what? The dogs are very thankful, for sure, that you found a way to look at things that way. And the Do No Harm Dog Training and Behaviour Handbook. I get to read a lot of books, and I'm not just saying it because you're here, but it was one of the joys of this year reading this book for me, and getting stuck into that, and having a lot of yes moments, really, and thinking, yeah, and you've got a great way of kind of communicating some quite challenging topics, actually, and I think that's a great thing. Linda, we've come up to the hour. Is there anything you'd like to share with us as a kind of a passing thought, or anything you'd like to discuss before we let you go?
Well, I mean, so much, Andy, as I was talking to you prior to the show, I have so much to share. It's
that's good, because we need to get you back then, Linda, which is a great thing. Then we've got an excuse now to get you back.
I would love to come back. Let me just touch on what you said about love, because I learned from Dr. Gregory Burns, the famous functional MRI researcher, that what scientists call attachment is what we call love. So that's kind of makes it easier for us to use the term love. Plus, even though biologists have been reluctant to use the terms, some have not, because Dr. Burns wrote a book called How Dogs Love Us. And he's a neuroscientist. So, he wanted to, and you mentioned, who has the master's degree, and where's the master's degree about how a dog feels?
Yeah.
And his goal is to understand the dog-human relationship from the dog's perspective.
Yeah.
So, that would make a great dissertation topic. And also, Dr. Brian Hare wrote a chapter in his book, For the Love of a Dog. So this is, becoming, more and more common, and which, leads us to the topic of attachment and attachment disorders, secure attachment, disorganized attachment, which I would love to chat with you about one day, because that ties into shelter work, as well as, how we want to help our puppies adapt to being torn away from their mothers and their siblings and placed in this foreign land with strangers, and how we can help puppies as well as rescue dogs, and how important the concept of attachment is for all of us, as well as for our puppies and dogs.
I couldn't agree more. I think when we think about the concept of social safety period, what it means, how our brains are so attuned to that. I'm really into Matthew Lieberman's work at the moment, and what he's looking at regarding the default network with the brain, and how it's associated with us seeking social safety. And I think this is another aspect of what we might class as love, of course. seeking of that safety and the feeling safe. And there's a lot to unpack, I think, and it'd be great to have you back to talk about things in a more kind of specific way, Linda, for sure. Well, thank you so much for today. It's been amazing to have you, and I know it's a bit of a coup for us in the group. And I know you're very selective about having these conversations, and it's just been amazing, Linda. I think definitely we need to get you back for more. And thank you again on behalf of everybody really for the work that you do. And also, I know you have a lot of great people like Roman, who's been helping out in the group today. So thanks, Roman. We must get you in the group, Roman. Roman was going to come and have a chat before, but we had to postpone that for on my side of things. So you're still on my list, Roman. We're going to get you in.
Of moderators in the Do No Harm Facebook group. And I just want to thank you, Andy. I mean, you are a shining light and an inspiration, both, academically and competence wise, as a trailblazer in the field, as well as making us all feel welcome. I mean, this is a safe place for me. And I so appreciate you for, having this terrific platform where we can come and, speak openly about our passions. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that. And that's the whole point of the group, really, is to provide that safe space. And it's interesting how many voices, I put a post in the group seeing who might want to come and chat in the group next year and be part of panel discussions. And I've been inundated, Linda, because people do feel that they have a safe space and they can talk about things. Well, thank you for that, darling. And I, as I said at the beginning of the hour, I couldn't have, we've kind of gone full circle, really, because I don't think I'd have pressed that button to put Phantom of the Opera out without people like yourself. Because it is hard to turn up sometimes. It's hard to think, I'm going to put this out. And so I've sat on it for so long. So thank you for that. Okay, everybody. So our next and last chat before Christmas is on Monday with the amazing Rachel Leather, who's coming back in, who's going to be talking a bit about attachment, actually, from a trauma point of view, Linda. I think this is going to be a really interesting chat. Just to let you know, a new little initiative that I'm going to be starting in the new year is, I know a lot of people appreciate these conversations, and we get really big viewership on the catch-ups and on YouTube. So I'm going to start in the new year picking a rescue, which is going to be the rescue of the month. And then if you really want to show your appreciation, the idea is that I'll share links for that whole month for that one rescue, and you can donate even $1, a pound, whatever your currency is. Hopefully with the number of people in the group, we can make a bit of a difference there. And also we're going to start these panel discussions next year, where I just want to get more people in the room, Linda. I think it'd be great, including caregivers, group members, and we're going to be hearing a lot more from caregivers. So a lot of the emails I've had, Linda, are from caregivers who have found the group, who have got an amazing story to tell. There's a democratization here, isn't there, I think, now, because whilst we welcome the input of our friends in academia, a caregiver living this lived experience has a story to offer and share with us. So I'm really looking forward to all these things next year. Okay, well, look, everybody, if I don't see you on Monday with Rachel, have a wonderful Christmas if it's a holiday that you celebrate. But I wish everybody a peaceful and happy new year for sure. But try and check out Rachel on Monday, because it's going to be a great chat. And thank you again, Linda. Have a wonderful Christmas yourself, darling. I can see you've got the tree up, which is good. Getting ready for the celebrations.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Roman, for being my temporary admin today.
Yes, thank you, Roman.